Hey everybody, and welcome back. And for those who are new here, welcome. We are going to be continuing on with the Sword of Shannara today. Miss Skitter is trying to decide where she's going to lay, whether behind my back, in my arm, or across my chest. She's just being finicky right now. Ugh, I hate these reading glasses. So, this is chapter 9. I'm going to be talking about chapter 7 for a second. I apologize that it was up 3 days late. Well, almost 4. No, it was supposed to be... Sorry, my brain is falling into an abyss right now. I was supposed to have it up on the 3rd. I didn't get up till the 5th. I apologize for that. I hadn't edited in about a week. I've been coming home from work absolutely exhausted and spending the next day just kind of ho-hummed and trying to get my energy back up so that I can go the next day. Yeah, today was my day off. I edited everything that I had backed up. So we've got, chapter 7 came up today. Oh, today's 5th, so it came up today. Chapter 8 is scheduled, and I have the second chapter of Dragon Drums scheduled. So, 2 recordings or 3 recordings? 2 recordings ahead for the Master Harper Hall, or the Harper Hall series by Anne McCaffrey. Oh, goodness. Sorry, it's been a very long day. I don't know how much I'm recording tonight. Wednesday, in 2 days I plan on doing more recording. Tomorrow I'm going to do some more editing. Kind of liking how my hair just sort of fell today. I've just brushed it while it was wet and let it dry, and this is what it turned into. Kind of like it, but when I look at it in the mirror, I can see all the gray on the top. I don't like that very much anymore. Yeah. So, for chapter 8 of the Sword of Shannara, we are in Callhaven? Yeah, we're in Callhaven because Callahorn is where Brahan's from. Shay and Flick have arrived. They don't really know how they've gotten there, but they have guards at all times to keep them safe because they are being stalked. They asked for searchers to go out for Menion. He was brought in by Handel, and then Al-Anon appeared 3 days late. So everybody is there with we sort of had a closed meeting with the Dwarven chiefs, the 2 nephews of the Elven King, Al-Anon, Menion Leah, and Shay and Flick, and goodness gracious, I cannot talk today. Of course, there's no cast of characters. Okay, well, my brain isn't working. So, we have So we now have a small party set together to go on this journey. It's going to be many on the Baranor? I can say it when I see it. I can't think of it. Alanon, the two dwarven, the two elves who we haven't really been introduced to yet, and Handel. And now we are going to go rescue the Sword of Shannara, or steal it back from Paranor, and hopefully get Paranor back. But we don't know how everything is going to go. It's always fun to find out. I'm sorry, my intro sucks today. And Skitter has left me. She's laying at my feet now. Chapter 9 of The Sword of Shannara by Terry Brooks. Shay stood quietly in the darkness outside of the assembly hall and let the night air wash over his hot face in cool waves. Flick was immediately to his right, the broad face grim in the shadowed moonlight. Menion leaned idly against a tall oak some yards off to their left. The meeting had concluded and Alanon had asked them to wait for him. The tall wanderer was still inside, making preparations with the dwarf elders to counter the expected invasion from the Upper Anar. Balinor was with them, coordinating the defense of the famed Border Legion in distant Calahorn with that of the dwarf army of the Eastland. Shay was relieved to be out of this stuffy little room, out in the open night where he could consider more clearly his hasty decision to go with the company to Paranor. He knew, and he guessed, Flick must have known as well, that they could not expect to stay out of the inevitable conflict centering around the Sword of Shannara. They could have stayed in Callhaven, living almost like prisoners, hoping that the dwarf people would protect them from the searching skull bearers. They could have stayed in this strange land apart from all who knew them, perhaps forgotten in time by everyone except the dwarves. But to alienate themselves that way would have been worse than any imaginable fate at the hands of the enemy. For the first time, Shay realized that he must accept that fact. Finally, and forever, that he was no longer merely the adopted son of Curzad Omsford. He was the son of the elven house of Shannara, the son of kings and heir to the fabled sword. And though he would have wished it otherwise, he must accept what chance had decreed for him. He looked quietly at his brother, who stood lost in thought, staring at the darkened earth, and he felt a keen pang of sorrow at the remembrance of the other's loyalty. Flick was courageous and loved him, but he had not bargained for this unexpected turn of events that would take them into the heart of the enemy's country. Shay did not want Flick to be involved in this matter. It was not his responsibility. He knew that the stocky Valeman would never desert him so long as he felt he could help. But perhaps now Flick could be persuaded to remain behind, even to return to the Shady Vale to explain to their father what had befallen them. But even as he toyed with the idea, he discarded it, knowing that Flick would never turn back. Whatever else happened, he would see this matter through. There was a time, Flick's quiet voice broke into his thoughts, when I would have sworn that I would live out my life in uneventful solitude in Shady Vale. Now it appears that I will be part of an effort to save mankind. Do you think I should have chosen otherwise? Shay asked after a moment of silent thought. No, I don't think so. Flick shook his head. But remember what we talked about on the trip here. About things beyond our control, even our understanding. You see how little control we now have over what's to become of us. He paused and looked squarely over his shoulder. I think you made the right choice, and whatever happens, I'll be with you. Shay smiled broadly and placed a hand on the other's shoulder, thinking to himself that this was exactly what he had predicted Flick would say. It was a small gesture perhaps, but one that meant more to him than any other could have. He was aware of the sudden approach of Menion from the other side and turned to face the Highlander. I suppose you think me some sort of fool after what happened in there tonight, Menion stated abruptly. But this fool stands along with old Flick. Whatever happens, we'll face it together, be it mortal or spirit. You caused that scene in there to get Shay to agree to go, didn't you? An irate Flick demanded. That's the lowest trick I have ever witnessed. Never mind, Flick, Shay cut him short. Menion knew what he was doing, and he did the right thing. I would have decided to go anyway. At least I'd like to believe I would. Now we've got to forget the past, forget our differences, and stand together for our own preservation. As long as I stand where I can see him, retorted his brother bitterly. The door to the conference room opened suddenly, and the broad figure of Balinor was silhouetted in the torchlight from within. He surveyed the three men standing just beyond him in the darkness, then closed the door and walked over to them, smiling slightly as he approached. I'm glad you decided to come with us, all of you, he stated simply. I must add, Shay, that without you, the trip would have been pointless. Without the heir of Gerald Shannara, the sword is only so much metal. What can you tell us about this magic weapon? Menion asked quickly. I'll leave that to Alanon, replied Balinor. He plans to speak with you here in just a few minutes. Menion nodded, inwardly disturbed at the prospect of encountering the tall man again that evening, but curious to hear more about the power of the sword. Shay and Flick exchanged quick glances, At least they would learn the full story behind what was happening in the Northland. "Why are you here, Balinor?" Flick asked cautiously, not wishing to pry into the borderman's personal affairs. "It's a rather long story. You would not be interested," replied the other almost sharply, immediately causing Flick to believe that he had overstepped his bounds. Balinor saw his charged look and smiled reassuringly. "My family and I have not been on very good terms lately. My younger brother and I had a disagreement, and I wanted to leave the city for a while. Alanon asked me to accompany him to the Anar. Handel and the others were old friends, so I agreed." "Sounds like a familiar tale," commented Menion dryly. "I've some problems like that myself from time to time." Balinor nodded and managed a half smile, but Shay could tell from his eyes that he did not consider this a laughing matter. Whatever had caused him to leave Callahorn was more serious than anything Menion had ever encountered in Leah. Shay quickly changed the subject. "What can you tell us about Alanon? We seem to be placing an unusual amount of trust in him, and we still know absolutely nothing about the man. Who is he?" Balinor arched his eyebrows and smiled, amused by the question, and at the same time uncertain as how it should be answered. He walked away from them and a little, thinking to himself, and then turned back abruptly and motioned vaguely towards the assembly hall. "I really don't know much about Alanon myself," he admitted frankly. "He travels a great deal, exploring the country, recording in his notes the changes and the growth of the land and its people. He's well known in all the nations. I think he has been everywhere. The extent of his knowledge of this world is extraordinary. Most of it isn't in any book. He is very remarkable." "But who is he?" Shay persisted eagerly, feeling that he must learn the true origin of the historian. "I can't say for certain, because he has never confided completely, even in me. And I am almost like a son to him," Balinor stated very quietly. So softly, in fact, that they all moved a bit closer to be certain they missed nothing of what was to follow. "The elders of the dwarves and of my own kingdom say that he is the greatest of the druids, that almost forgotten council that governed men over 1,000 years ago. They say that he is a direct descendant of the druid Brahmin, perhaps even of Gallifile himself. I think that there is more than a little truth in that statement, because he went to Paranor often and stayed for long periods, recording his findings in the great record books stored there." He paused for a moment, and his three listeners glanced at each other, wondering if the grim historian could actually be a direct descendant of the Druids, thinking in awe of the centuries of history behind the man. Shay had suspected before that Al-Anon was one of the ancient philosophers' teachers known as Druids, and it seemed apparent that the man possessed a greater knowledge of the races and the origins of the threat facing them than did anyone else. He turned back to Balinor, who was speaking again. "I can't explain it, but I don't believe we could be in better company for any peril, even if we were to come face to face with the Warlock Lord himself. Though I haven't one shred of concrete evidence, nor even an example to cite you. I'm certain that Al-Anon's power is beyond anything we could have ever seen. He would be a very, very dangerous enemy." "Of that I haven't the slightest doubt," Flick muttered dryly. Only minutes later, the door of the conference room opened and Al-Anon stepped quietly into view. In the half-light of the moon, he was huge and forbidding, almost like a replica of the dreaded skull-bearers they feared so much, the dark cape billowing slightly as he moved towards them, his lean face hidden in the depths of the long cowl about his head. They were silent as he approached, wondering what he would tell them, what it would mean for them in the days ahead. Perhaps he could know their thoughts instinctively as he walked up to them, but their eyes could not pierce the mask of inscrutability that cloaked his grim features and sheltered the man buried within. They could only see the sudden glint of his eyes as he stopped before them and looked slowly from one face to the next. A deep silence settled ominously over the little group. "The time has come for you to learn the full story behind the Sword of Shannara, to learn the history of the races, as only I know it to be." His voice reached out and drew them commandingly to him. "It is essential that Shay should understand, and since the rest of you share the risks involved, you should also know the truth. What you will learn tonight must be kept in confidence until I tell you it no longer matters. This will be hard, but you must do it." He motioned for them to follow him and moved away from the clearing, drawing them deeper into the darkness of the trees beyond. When they were several hundred feet into the forest, he turned into a small, almost hidden clearing. He seated himself on the worn stub of an ancient trunk and motioned the others to find a place. They did so quickly and waited in silence as the famous historian gathered his thoughts and prepared to speak. "A very, very long time ago," he began finally, still considering his explanation as he spoke. "Before the Great Wars, before the existence of the races as we know them today, the land was, or was thought to be, populated only by man. Civilization had developed even before then, for many thousands of years. Years of hard toil and learning that brought man to a point where he was on the verge of mastering the secrets of life itself. It was a fabulous, exciting time to live in. So expansive that much of it would be totally beyond your comprehension were I empowered to draw you the most perfect picture. But while man worked all those years to discover the secrets of life, he never managed to escape his overpowering fascination for death. It was a constant alternative, even in the most civilized of the nations. Strangely enough, the catalyst of each new discovery was the same endless pursuit: the study of science. Not the science the races know today. Not the study of animal life, plant life, the earth, and the simple arts. This was the science of machines and power, one that divided itself into infinite fields of exploration, all of which worked towards the same two ends: discovering better ways to live, or quicker ways to kill. He paused and laughed grimly to himself, cocking his head in the direction of the attentive Balinor. Very strange indeed, when you think about it, that man should spend so much time working towards two such obviously different goals. Even now, nothing has changed, even after all these years. His voice trailed off for a moment, and Shay risked a brief look at the others, but their eyes were fixed on the speaker. Sciences of physical power. Al-Anon's sudden exclamation brought Shay's head around with a snap. These were the means to all the ends of that era. 2,000 years ago, the achievements of the human race were unparalleled in Earth's history. Man's age-old enemy, death, could now claim only those who had lived out their natural lifetime. Sickness was virtually eliminated, and, given a bit more time, man would have even found a way to prolong life. Some philosophers claimed that the secrets of life were forbidden to mortals. No one had ever proved otherwise. They might have done so, but their time ran out, and the same elements of power that had made life free from sickness and infirmity nearly destroyed it altogether. The great wars began, building gradually from smaller disputes between a few peoples and spreading steadily. Despite the realization of what was happening, spreading from little matters into basic hatreds, race, nationality, boundaries, creeds. In the end, everything. Then, suddenly, so suddenly, that few knew what had happened. The entire world was enveloped in a series of retaliatory attacks by the different countries, all very scientifically planned and executed. In a matter of minutes, the science of thousands of years, the learning of centuries, accumulated in the almost total destruction of life. The great wars. The deep voice was grim, the glint of those dark eyes watching carefully the faces of his listeners. Very apt name. The power expanded in those few minutes of battle not only succeeded in wiping out these thousands of years of human growth, but it also began a series of explosions and upheavals that completely altered the surface of the land. The initial force did most of the damage, killing every living thing over 90% of the face of the earth. But the after effects carried on the alteration and extinction, breaking the continents apart, drying up oceans, making land and sea uninhabitable for several hundred years. It should have been the end of all life, perhaps the end of the world itself. Only a miracle prevented that end. I can't believe it. The words slipped out before Shay could catch himself, and Alanon looked towards him, the familiar mocking smile spreading over his lips. That's your history of civilized man, Shay, he murmured darkly. But what happened thereafter concerns us more directly. Remnants of the race of man managed to survive during the terrible period following the Holocaust, living in isolated sectors of the globe, fighting the elements for survival. This was the beginning of the development of the races as they are today. Men, dwarves, gnomes, trolls, and some say elves. But they were always there, and that's another story for another time. Alanon had made exactly the same comment concerning the elven people to the Omsford brothers in Shady Vale. Shay wanted badly to stop the narration at that point to ask about the race of elves and his own origin. But he knew better than to irate the tall historian by breaking in, as he did several times during their first meeting. A few men remembered the secrets of the sciences, and that shaped their way of life prior to the destruction of the old world. Only a few remembered. Most were little more than primitive creatures, and the few could recollect only bits and pieces of knowledge. But they had kept their books of learning intact, and those could tell them most of the secrets of the old sciences. They kept them hidden and secure during their first several hundred years, unable to put the words into practical use, waiting for the time when they might. They read their precious texts instead, and then as the books themselves began to crumble with age, and there was no way to preserve them or copy them. Those few men who possessed the books began to memorize the information. The years passed, and the knowledge was passed down carefully from father to son, each generation keeping the knowledge safely within the family, guarding it from those who didn't use it wisely, those who might create a world in which the great wars could happen a second time. In the end, even after it once again became possible to record the information in those irreplaceable books, the men who had memorized them declined to do so. They were still afraid of the consequences, afraid of each other and even themselves. So they decided, individually, for the most part, to wait for the right time to offer their knowledge to the growing new races. The years passed in this way as the new races slowly began to develop beyond the stage of primitive life. They began to unify into communities, trying to build a new life out of the dust of the old. But, as you have already been told, they did not prove equal to the task. They quarreled violently over land, petty disputes which soon turned into armed conflict between the races. It was then when the sons of those who had first kept the secrets of the old life, the old sciences, saw that matters were steadily regressing towards the very thing that had destroyed the old world, that they decided to act. The man called Gallifile saw what was happening and recognized that if nothing were done, the races would surely be at war. So he called together a select group of men, all he could find who possessed any knowledge of the old books, to a council at Paranor. So that was the first Druid council, murmured many on Leah in wonder. A council of all the knowledgeable men of that era, pooling their learning to save the races. A very praiseworthy effort at explaining the desperate attempt to prevent extermination of life, laughed Alanon shortly. The Druid Council was formed with the best intentions on the part of most, perhaps all at first. They exerted a tremendous influence over the races because they were capable of offering so much to make life considerably better for everyone. They operated strictly as a group, each man contributing his knowledge for the benefit of all. Although they succeeded in preventing an outbreak of total war and kept peace between the races at first, they encountered unexpected problems. The knowledge that each possessed had become unavoidably altered in small ways in the telling from generation to generation, so that many of the key understandings were different than what they had been. Complicating this situation was understandable in inability to coordinate the different materials, the knowledge of the different sciences. For many of the council members, the learning passed down to them by their ancestors lacked meaning in practical terms, and much of it appeared to be so many jumbled words. So while the Druids, as they called themselves after an ancient group who sought understanding, were able to aid the races in many ways, they found themselves unable to piece together enough out of the texts that they had memorized to master readily any of the important concepts of the great sciences, the concepts they felt certain would help the country to grow and prosper. Then the Druids wanted the old world rebuilt on their terms, spoke up Shay quickly. They wanted to prevent the wars that had destroyed them the first time, yet recreate the benefits of all the old sciences. Flick shook his head in bewilderment, unable to see what all of this had to do with the warlord and the sword. Correct, Alanon noted. But the Druid Council, for all its vast knowledge and good intentions, overlooked a basic concept of human existence. Whenever an intelligent creature possesses an innate desire to improve its conditions, to unlock the secrets of process, it will find the means to do so, if not by one method, then by another. The Druids secluded themselves at Paranor, away from the races of the land, while they worked alone or in small groups to master the secrets of the old sciences. Most relied on the materials at hand, the knowledge of individual members related to that of the entire council, to try and rebuild and reconstruct the means of harnessing power. But some were not content with this approach. A few felt that instead of trying to understand the words and thoughts of the ancient recollections better, that such knowledge as could be immediately grasped should be acted upon and developed in connection with new ideas and new realizations. So it was that a few members of the council, acting under the leadership of one called Brona, began to delve into the ancient mysteries without waiting for full understanding of the old sciences. They had phenomenal minds, geniuses in a few instances. They were very eager to succeed, impatient to master the power that would be so useful to the races. But by a strange quirk of fate, their discoveries and their developments led them further and further from the studies of the council. The old sciences were puzzles without answers for them, and so they developed into other fields of thought, slowly and relentlessly intertwining themselves in a realm of study that none had ever mastered and none called science. What they began to unveil was the infinite power of the mystic, sorcery. They mastered a few of the secrets of the mystics before they were discovered by the council and commanded to abandon their work. There was a violent disagreement, and the followers of Brona left the council in anger, determined to continue their own approach. They disappeared and were not seen again. He paused for a moment, considering his explanation. His listeners waited impatiently. We know now what happened in the years that followed. During his prolonged studies, Brona uncovered the deepest secrets of sorcery and mastered them. But in the progress, he lost his own identity, eventually even his own soul, to the powers he had sought so eagerly. Forgotten were the old sciences and their purpose in the world of man. Forgotten was the Druid Council and its goal for a better world. Forgotten was everything but the driving urge to learn more of the mystic arts, the secrets of the mind's power to reach into other worlds. Brona was obsessed with the need to extend his power, to dominate men and the world they inhabited through the mastery of this terrible force. The result of this ambition was the infamous First War of the Races, when he gained dominance over the weak and confused minds of the race of man, causing that helpless people to make war on the other races, subjecting them to the will of the man who was no longer a man, who was no longer even the master of himself. And his followers? Asked Menon slowly. Victims of the same. They became servants to their leader, all slaves of the strange power of sorcery. Alanon trailed off hesitantly, as if to add something, but uncertain of its effect on his listeners. Thinking better of it, he continued. The fact that these unfortunate druids stumbled onto the very opposite of what they were seeking is in itself a lesson to man. Perhaps with patience, they might have pieced together the missing links to the old sciences, rather than uncovering the terrible power of the spirit world that fed eagerly on their unprotected minds until they were devoured. Human minds are not equipped to face the realities of the non-material existence on this sphere. It is too much for any mortal to bear for long. Again, he trailed off into ominous silence. The listeners now understood the nature of the enemy they were trying to outwit. They were up against a man who was no longer a human, but the projection of some great force beyond their own comprehension. A force so powerful that Alanon feared it, and it would affect the human mind. The rest you already know, Alanon began again rather sharply. The creature, called Brona, who no longer resembled anything human, was the directing force beyond both of the race wars. The Skullbearers are the followers of their old master Brona. Those druids, once human in form, once a part of the council at Paranor. They cannot escape their fate any more than he can. The very forms they take are an embodiment of the evil they represent. But more important for our purposes, they represent a new age for mankind, for all the people of the Four Lands. Well, the old sciences have disappeared into our history, forgotten now as completely as the years when the machines were the godsend of an easy life. The enhancement of sorcery has replaced them. A more powerful, more dangerous threat to human life than any before it. Do not doubt me, my friends. We live in the age of the sorcerer, and his power threatens to consume us all. There was a moment of silence. A deep stillness hung oppressively in the forest night as Alanon's final words seemed to echo back with ringing sharpness. Then Shay spoke softly. What is the secret of the sword of Shannara? In the first War of the Races, Alanon replied in almost a whisper, the power of the druid Brona was limited. As a result, the combined might of the other races, coupled with the knowledge of the Druid Council, defeated his army of men and drove him into hiding. He might have ceased to be, and the whole incident been written off as merely another chapter in history, another war between mortals, except that he managed to unlock the secret of perpetuating his spiritual presence long after his mortal remains should have decomposed and turned to dust. Somehow he preserved his own spirit, feeding it on the power of the mystic forces he now possessed, giving it a life beyond materiality, be apart from mortality. He now was able to bridge the two worlds, the world we live in and the spirit world beyond, where he summoned black wraiths that had for centuries laid dormant and waited for his time to strike back. As he waited, he watched the races drift apart, as he knew they must in time. The power of the Druid Council wane as their interest in the races grow lax. As with all things evil, he waited until the balance of hatred, envy, greed, the human failings common to all the races, outweighed the goodness and kindness. And then he struck, gaining easy control of the primitive, warlike rock trolls of the Charmel Mountains. He reinforced their numbers with creatures of the spirit world he now served, and his army marched on the divided races. As you know, they crushed the Druid Council and destroyed it. All save a few who fled to safety. One of those who escaped was an aged mystic called Bremen, who had foreseen the dangers and in the vain attempt to warn the others. As a druid, he was originally a historian, and in that capacity had studied the First War of the Races and learned of Brona and his followers. Intrigued by what they had attempted to do, and suspicious that perhaps the mysterious druid had acquired powers that no one had known about nor could have hoped to combat. Bremen began his own study of the mystic arts, but with the greater care and respect for the possible power he felt he might unlock. After several years of this pursuit, he became convinced that Brona was still existent and that the next war upon the human race would be started and eventually decided by the powers of the sorcery and black magic. You can imagine the response he received to this theory. He was practically thrown from the confines of Paranor. As a result, he began to master the mystic arts on his own, and so was not present when the castle of Paranor fell to the troll army. He knew that if he did not act, the races would be left defenseless against the enchantment of Brona had mastered, power that mortals knew nothing about. But he was faced with the problem of how to defeat the creature who could not be touched by any mortal weapon, one who survived for over 500 years. He went to the greatest nation of his time, the Elven people, under the command of a courageous young king named Shannara, and offered his assistance. The Elven people had always respected Bremen because they understood him better than even his fellow druids. He had lived among them for years prior to the fall of Paranor, well studying the science of the mystic. "There is something I don't understand," Balinor spoke up suddenly. "If Bremen was to master the mystic arts, why could he not himself challenge the power of the Warlock Lord?" Alanon's response was somehow evasive. He did confront Brona in the end on the plains of the Strawhallam, though it was not a battle that was visible to mortal eyes, and both disappeared. It was presumed that Bremen had defeated the Spirit King, but time has proven otherwise, and now... He hesitated only an instant before quickly returning to his narrative. But the emphasis on the pause was not lost on any of the listeners. In the event, Bremen realized that was what was needed, was a talisman to survive as a shield against the possible return of one such as Brona in another time, when there was no one familiar with the mystic arts to offer assistance to the people of the Four Lands. So he conceived the idea of this sword, a weapon which would contain the power to defeat the Warlock Lord. Bremen forged the Sword of Shannara with the aid of his own mystic prowess, sharpening it with more than mere metal of our own world, giving it that special protective characteristic of all the talismans against the unknown. The sword was to draw its strength from the minds of the mortals for whom it acted as a shield. The power of the sword was their own desire to remain free, to give up even their lives to preserve that freedom. This was the power that enabled Gerald Shannara to destroy the spirit-dominated Northland army then. It is the same power that must now be used to send the Warlock Lord back into the limbo world to which he belongs, to imprison him there for all eternity, to cut off entirely his passage back to this world. But as long as he has the sword, then he has a chance to prevent its power from being used to destroy him forever. And that, my friends, is the one thing that must not be. But then why is it that only a son of the House of Shannara? The question formed on Shay's fumbling lips, his own mind reeling confusedly. "That is the greatest irony of all," exclaimed Alanon, before the question was even completed. "If you have followed all that I have related about the change of life following the Great Wars, the giving way of the old materialistic sciences to the science of the present age, the science of the mystic, then you will understand what I am about to explain. The strangest phenomenon of all. Well, the sciences of the old operated on practical theories built around things that could be seen and touched and felt. The sorcery of our own operatives operates on an entirely different principle. Its power is potent only when it is believed, for its power over the mind, which can neither be touched nor seen through human senses. If the mind does not truly find some basis for belief in the existence, then it can have no real effect. The Warlock Lord realizes this, and the minds and the fear of what belief in the unknown, the worlds, the creatures, all the occurrences that cannot be understood by man's limited senses, offer him more than enough basis upon which to practice the mystic arts. He had been relying on this promise for over 500 years. In the same way, the sword of Shannara cannot be an effective weapon unless the one holding it believes in his power to use it. When Brahman gave the sword to Gerald Shannara, he made the mistake of giving it directly to a king and to the house of a king. He did not give it to the people of the lands. As a result, through human misunderstanding and historical miscomprehension, the universal belief that grew that the sword was a weapon of the elven king alone, and that only those descended of his blood could take up the sword against the warlock lord. So now, unless it is held by a son of the house of Shannara, that person can never fully believe in his right to use it. The ancient tradition that only such a one can wield it will make all others doubt. And there must be no doubt, or it will not operate. Instead, it will become merely another piece of metal. Only the blood and belief of a descendant of Shannara can invoke the latent power of the great sword. He concluded. The silence that followed was hollow, and there was nothing left to tell the four that could be told. Al-Anon reconsidered briefly what he had promised himself. He had not told them everything, purposely holding back the little more that would have proved the final terror for them. He inwardly felt torn between the desire to have it all out and in the gnawing realization that it would destroy any chance of success. Their success was of paramount importance. Only he knew the full truth of that fact. So he sat in silence, bitter in his private knowledge and angered by the self-imposed limits he had set for himself. The limits that forbade a complete revelation to those who could depend upon him so very heavily. Then only Shay can use the sword if... Valinor broke the silence abruptly. Only Shay has the birthright. Only Shay. It was so quiet that even the nightlife of the forest seemed to have stilled in its insistent clatter to sober contemplation of the grim historian's reply. The future came down to each as a simple declaration of existence. Succeed, or be destroyed. Leave me now, commanded Al-Anon suddenly. Sleep while you can. We leave this haven at sunrise for the halls of Paranor. And that, my dear friends, is the end of Chapter 9. So to make my guessing game, as I've have for the last several chapters, I think this one's going to be about an hour long after editing. Maybe just a few minutes longer. I don't think it's going to be too huge today. It was fun to read, though. We actually got a history of the sword and a history of what's been going on in the world. So what I take from Al-Anon's story is what happened in this timeline, where we are getting closer and closer and closer to everything being cured, to people living longer, and people are living a lot longer now. But we are also seeing more wars. We are seeing more battles. It could put a lot of interesting things to place in this series. So, basically that what it sounds like is a nuclear war. 90% of the world was gone. Nothing. So extinction of many types of animals, of the races of man, changing into like the dwarves, the gnomes, the trolls, and of course we're still age-old humans because some people don't like to change. And we end up with the hodgepodge of races that there are now. And like Al-Anon continuously likes to say, and the elves, well, they were always there. But that's a story for another time. And that's a fun one to get to. We will go there, just not right now. I don't have a whole lot to chat about tonight, other than the fact that, oh my god, I didn't realize that was just a whole lot of Al-Anon talking, and that deep voice was so hard to do. I almost stopped and just went to a regular speaking voice multiple times. But then I go, well, I'm trying to do it, and then I keep going, and my throat would hurt, and I think again about it, and then I go, but I'm trying to do it. Yeah. So, that's what happened. So we had Miss Skitter for a moment at the beginning, and she slept at my feet for a good 30 minutes. And she wandered off, and we got to hear her sing a few times. So, normal Skitter behavior during a video. Don't know if I'm going to record anything else tonight. That took a lot out of me. My voice is a little sore, and I need to use it tomorrow. Thank you guys for sticking around. I really, really appreciate it. Just know that I really appreciate that you're here, no matter what. But if you'd like, please give a like, comment, and if you haven't already, subscribe. Because I'm sure there's those of you who want to continue hearing these stories, and I plan on going as long as I can. On the main screen, there's playlists where you can get, from chapter 1 of this book, the Harper Hall series, and a little bit of Roald Dahl, though I've only done one book of that so far. I still want to do the BFG, but I haven't had a whole lot of time for doing recording. And I want to get these two books, well, at least the next two books done as quick as possible. Thanks again, everybody. Have yourself a great day. Bye-bye.